Imagine holding a secret so dangerous that it could send your entire family to prison, or worse, cost 4 innocent lives their future. For Lucas Smith, that nightmare began on a stormy night when he looked under his deck and found 4 orphaned lion cubs staring back at him. But the real terror wasn't the wild animals. It was the realization that the local authorities were the ones hunting them. Faced with a corrupt warden and a deadline that was ticking down by the second, Lucas had to make an impossible choice: obey the law and let them die, or become an outlaw to save them. This is the incredible story of a backyard rescue that exposed a massive conspiracy and changed an entire community forever. You are not going to want to miss a second of this. But before we dive into the storm, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out and allows us to keep bringing you these powerful, untold stories. Now, let's find out what happened. The rain that night didn't just fall. It felt like it was trying to erase the world. It was a torrential, angry deluge that turned the dark soil of the valley into a shifting slurry, hammering against the tin roof of the farmhouse with the volume of 1,000 drum beats. Lucas Smith stood on the wraparound deck, a mug of cold coffee forgotten in his hand. At 50 years old, Lucas was a man who appreciated structure. As a landscape architect, he had spent his entire professional life imposing order on nature, creating clean lines, retaining walls and boundaries where there were none. He understood the physics of earth and stone. But out here, on the ragged, untamed edge of the Nila River Reserve, nature didn't negotiate. It took what it wanted. He pulled the collar of his wax canvas jacket tighter against his neck, squinting into the pitch black. The reserve fence, a heavy-gauge mesh that marked the end of his property and the beginning of the true wild, was invisible in the storm. He was looking for damage, worrying about the stability of the corner posts in this mud, but his mind was drifting to darker places. He thought about the stack of unpaid bills sitting on the kitchen counter, the isolation that was slowly eating away at his wife's vibrancy, and the quiet, gnawing fear that moving his family this far out had been a catastrophic mistake. He felt like a captain of a sinking ship, standing on the bridge while the water rose. Then he heard it. It wasn't the wind. The wind shrieked and howled, a constant, high-pitched soprano that rattled the window panes. This sound was different, a wet, guttural, rhythmic distress. It was low to the ground, a sound of pure misery that cut through the atmospheric noise like a razor. Lucas stiffened. He leaned over the railing, the rain lashing his face. "Jane!" he yelled, though the wind snatched the name from his lips before it reached the screen door. He didn't wait for an answer. The sound triggered something primal in him, a protective instinct that bypassed logic. He grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from the railing and descended the stairs. His boots sank immediately into ankle-deep sludge, the cold mud sucking at his heels with every step. He followed the beam of yellow light, sweeping it under the raised foundations of the deck. The crawl space was usually dry, a haven for spiders and dust, but tonight it was a river of runoff. The sound came again, a desperate, gargled mewling. It sounded like a kitten, but deeper, raspier. Lucas dropped to his knees, ignoring the icy water soaking through the denim of his jeans. He shined the light into the furthest corner where the timber piling met the earth. There, huddled in a shivering, indistinguishable pile of tawny fur and mud, were 4 of them. They were so small they looked like drowned rats, their eyes squeezed shut against the grit and the cold. They were piled on top of one another, a heap of misery trying to synthesize warmth where there was absolutely none. The water was rising around them, inching up their small flanks. "Oh no," Lucas whispered, the breath leaving him in a rush of steam. "No, no, no!" He scrambled backward, slipping in the mud, and hammered his fist on the deck floorboards above him. "Jane, bring towels now. We have a situation." 20 minutes later, the farmhouse kitchen had been transformed into a trauma unit. The contrast between the storm outside and the kitchen was jarring. The room was warm, smelling of lemon polish and brewing coffee, but the tension was electric. Jane Smith, her hair pulled back in a severe bun that couldn't hide the terrified softness in her eyes, moved with the efficiency of a soldier. Years as a veterinary nurse had trained her for crisis, but usually, That crisis took place in a sterile clinic, with stainless steel tables and oxygen monitors, not on her own granite kitchen island with 4 wild predators. "Hypothermia," she said, her voice tight but controlled. She was rubbing one of the cubs vigorously with a warm towel, her hands moving in rapid, stimulating circles to get the blood flowing. "Lucas, the heating pad is in the linen closet, bottom shelf. Grab the extension cord. Amy, I need the hairdryer. Set it to low warmth, high speed. Keep it moving. Don't stop, and for goodness sake, don't burn them." Amy Smith, their 16-year-old daughter, stood by the counter, her face pale and streaked with tears. She held the smallest cub against her chest, shielded by a thick bath towel. The creature was barely the size of a house cat, its oversized paws twitching in a dream of running. Its fur was matted with mud, and its breathing was shallow and rattling. "They're shaking so hard, Mom," Amy whispered, her voice cracking. "They feel like ice. Where is their mother? Why isn't she here?" That was the question hanging in the humid, warm air of the kitchen, heavier than the storm outside. Lucas returned with the heating pad, plugging it in and sliding it under the laundry basket they had lined with fleece blankets. He looked at the cubs, really looked at them, for the first time. They were magnificent, even in this state. Their paws were disproportionately large, heavy with the promise of future power. Their coats, now drying into fluff under Jane's care, were patterned with faint rosettes that would fade with age. But it was their helplessness that struck Lucas the hardest. Lionesses were ferocious mothers. They did not lose cubs. They did not leave them under a stranger's porch in a storm unless they were dead or physically unable to move. "We get them warm first," Lucas said, his voice grim. He was looking at the largest of the 4, a male with a darker tint to his ears, who was already trying to hiss despite being too weak to lift his head. The tiny sound was absurdly ferocious. "We survive the night. Then, as soon as the lines are clear, we call Warden Reed." Jane paused, her hand resting on the flank of a female cub. She looked at Lucas. "If we call Reed," she said slowly, "they go into the system. You know what the system is like right now. Overcrowded. Underfunded." "We can't keep lions, Jane," Lucas said softly. "Look at them. They aren't stray cats. They are apex predators." "I know," she snapped, though there was no malice in it, only stress. "Just get me the glucose syrup. They need blood sugar." The night was a blur of bottle feeding and vigil. Jane concocted a makeshift emergency formula from goat's milk, egg yolks, and a dash of glucose, a temporary fix until they could get proper feline supplements. Lucas sat in the armchair in the corner, watching his wife and daughter work. He saw the way Amy whispered to the runt, the way Jane checked their gums for color. He saw the bond forming in real time, a tether of empathy being woven between his family and these orphans. It terrified him. By 4 a.m., the shivering had stopped. The kitchen was quiet, save for the rhythmic, raspy breathing of the 4 cubs asleep in the laundry basket. The storm outside had broken, leaving behind a heavy, dripping silence. When the sun finally broke over the horizon, painting the wet world in hues of bruised purple and gold, Lucas made a fresh pot of coffee. The caffeine barely touched his exhaustion. His eyes felt gritty, like they were full of sand. He grabbed his binoculars and stepped out onto the deck. The world smelled of wet earth and ozone. The devastation of the storm was visible in the downed branches, and the new rivers carved into his driveway, but Lucas wasn't looking at the landscaping. He was scanning the reserve. He needed to check the fence line. If the mother was out there, injured, he had to know. He scanned the tree line of the reserve, a dense thicket of acacia and scrub brush about 300 yards away. The Nila River Reserve was government-protected land, supposed to be a sanctuary for the dwindling lion populations of the region. Then, the lens of the binoculars caught a glint of metal. Lucas adjusted the focus wheel, the image sharpening. A black truck was parked just inside the reserve boundary, half hidden by the pale trunk of a fever tree. It wasn't one of the official Green Wildlife Patrol vehicles. It was a modified heavy-duty pickup, battered and indistinguishable, lacking any license plates. It looked like a bruised knuckle against the greenery. Lucas frowned, his grip tightening on the rubber coating of the binoculars. Two men stood by the truck. One was tall, wearing a crisp khaki uniform that Lucas recognized immediately. Warden Thomas Reed. Reed was the head of the local wildlife authority, a man with a politician's smile, perfectly coiffed hair, and eyes that never seemed to blink enough. The other man was shorter, thick-set, wearing camouflage hunting gear. He held a rifle slung over his shoulder, a high-caliber weapon that was clearly not standard issue for a ranger. They were laughing. Lucas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. He watched as the hunter clapped Reed on the shoulder and handed him a thick white envelope. Reed took it, weighed it in his hand, and tucked it into his breast pocket. He patted the pocket, then pointed toward the dense bush to the east, the restricted breeding sector, an area off-limits to tourists. The hunter climbed into the truck. In the back of the pickup, visible only for a split second as the vehicle turned to leave, was a transport cage. It was empty, but the heavy steel door was lashed open, ready. The realization hit Lucas with the force of a physical blow to the gut. The mother hadn't abandoned these cubs. She hadn't died of natural causes. She had been taken. And the man responsible for protecting her, the man Lucas was planning to call for help, had just taken payment for it. Lucas lowered the binoculars. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. He looked back at his house. He thought of the envelope. He thought of the empty cage. If he called Reed now, if he handed these cubs over, they wouldn't go to a rehabilitation center. They would be used as bait. They would be placed in a trap to lure the mother back. Or worse, sold into the same dark market that had just swallowed her. He turned and walked back into the house, locking the sliding glass door behind him and pulling the heavy curtains shut. Lucas? Jane looked up from the basket where the cubs were beginning to stir, letting out tiny, demanding squeaks for food. Did you get through to the warden's office? The phone lines are down, but I can try the mobile. Lucas looked at his wife, then at his daughter, and finally at the four helpless creatures in the basket. He walked to the table and sat down heavily. No, Lucas said, his voice steady for the first time since the storm. We aren't calling Reed. What? Why? Jane stood up, wiping her hands on a rag. Lucas, be reasonable. We can't keep them. It's a felony. They need professional care. We are the care, Lucas said. He leaned forward, keeping his voice low, as if the walls themselves had ears. He explained what he had seen. He described the truck, the hunter, the envelope, the casual intimacy of the corruption. He painted the picture of the empty cage. As he spoke, the gravity of the situation settled over the room like a wet blanket. The silence that followed was suffocating. If we report them, Jane whispered, looking down at the cubs with horror dawning on her face, we're handing them a death sentence. We hide them, Amy said suddenly. Her voice was fierce, startling both of her parents. She was stroking the head of the smallest cub, the runt who had latched onto her finger and was suckling on it. We have the old barn. It's soundproofed from when you used it as a workshop, Dad. No one comes out here. We're 5 miles from the nearest neighbor. It's insane, Jane said, pacing the kitchen. It's illegal. It's dangerous. But her eyes were already scanning the kitchen, calculating. They need high-protein formula. We need vaccines. I can get them from the clinic, mark them as waste. But Lucas, this is kidnapping. This is theft of government property. It's a rescue. Lucas corrected her gently. He reached into the basket. The largest male cub, the one with the dark ears, gummed his thumb, letting out a tiny ferocious squeak. We keep them alive, we keep them hidden, and we find out where Reed took the mother. 3 months, Jane said, exhaling a long, shaky breath, the fight leaving her. At 3 months, they start eating meat. Serious meat. 3 pounds each, maybe more. They'll be too big to hide. Their roars will carry for miles. We have until then to figure this out. Lucas looked at the cubs. Atlas, he said, nodding at the big male. That one is Atlas. He's carrying the weight of the world. Freya. Jane pointed to the female, who was already trying to climb out of the basket, her claws snagging the fabric. Jinx. Amy smiled through her tears at the one chewing on the basket's wicker rim, destroying it. "And this little one, this is Rue." The decision was made. The Smith family had just declared silent war on the local government, and their only weapon was a basket of orphans. The next 90 days were a blur of exhaustion, terror, and wonder. The barn became a fortress. Lucas spent his nights reinforcing the walls with heavy plywood and sound-dampening foam he ordered online under the guise of a home theater project. He created an indoor enclosure that was secure, warm, and enriched with logs and platforms. During the day, he worked his architectural jobs remotely, his eyes gritty with lack of sleep, constantly terrified that a client would hear a chuff or a growl over the Zoom call. Every car that passed on the distant highway made him freeze. Jane became the matriarch of a new, strange pride. She managed their diet with military precision, mixing calcium powder and taurine into raw meat as they weaned off the milk. She treated their parasites, charted their growth, and taught Lucas and Amy how to read their body language. Tail twitching like that means annoyance. She instructed one evening as Atlas, now 20 pounds of muscle and teeth, stalked a cardboard box. Ears flat means aggression. If they drop low, you back away. Never turn your back, never run. The bond that formed between the humans and the lions was profound and terrifying. These were not dogs. They were elemental forces wrapped in fur. Atlas was the protector, always placing himself between his siblings and the door. Freya was the hunter, silently stalking Lucas's boots, learning to move without making a sound. Jinx was chaos incarnate, climbing hay bales and falling onto his sisters, testing limits. But it was Rue and Amy that worried Lucas the most. The runt was smaller, weaker, and looked to Amy as his surrogate mother. When Amy sat in the straw to do her homework, Rue would curl up in her lap, his motor-like purr vibrating through her chest. He would groom her arm with his rough tongue. It was a beautiful, dangerous love. Lucas knew that every day Rue grew, the inevitable heartbreak drew closer. You cannot keep a lion in a barn forever. By the 3rd month, the strain was showing. The feed bill was astronomical. Lucas had drained their savings to buy bulk meat from a butcher 2 towns over to avoid suspicion, claiming he was feeding a team of large guard dogs. The cubs were now 40 pounds each. They were rowdy, loud, and getting stronger every day. The smell of raw meat and sawdust permeated Lucas's clothes. The outside world was beginning to encroach. One Tuesday afternoon, the air heavy with humidity, Lucas was repairing a section of the barn roof when he heard the drone. It was a high-pitched whine, like a mosquito on steroids. He looked down to see Amy standing in the tall grass of the back paddock, wearing her VR goggles, piloting her camera drone high over the reserve. "Amy!" Lucas hissed, scrambling down the ladder. "Bring it down! If the rangers see it!" "Dad, wait!" Amy said, not taking off the goggles. Her voice was distant, focused. "I'm at the coordinates where you saw the truck, the restricted sector. Amy, bring it back, now!" "I see something," she murmured, her voice trembling. "There are cages, hidden under camo netting. It's a camp. There are... Oh my!" "What?" Lucas was beside her now, grabbing her shoulder. "I see a lioness," Amy said, her breath hitching. "She's alone. She's pacing. She looks hurt, Dad. She has a scar on her flank. A jagged line." Lucas froze. He remembered the cubs. Freya had a distinct birthmark on her flank, a patch of white fur. Genetics. "Record it," Lucas commanded, his heart rate spiking. "Get the footage and get out." Amy tapped the controller. "Coming home." As the drone buzzed back toward them, dipping low over the trees like a returning bird of prey, a cloud of dust appeared on the long gravel driveway leading to their house. Lucas's stomach dropped. It was a green Land Rover with the official crest of the Wildlife Authority on the door. He glanced at Amy, panic flaring. If Reed had been on patrol, he could easily have seen the drone hovering over the restricted sector and followed it back to the pilot. Inside, Lucas ordered, his voice low and dangerous. "Get the drone, get in the house. Hide the controller. Do not go near the barn. Do not look at the barn." Amy ran, clutching the drone against her chest. Lucas wiped his sweaty palms on his jeans, took a deep breath that tasted of dust and fear, and walked around to the front of the house just as the Land Rover crunched to a halt. Warden Thomas Reed stepped out. Up close, he smelled of expensive cologne and stale tobacco, a jarring mix in the fresh country air. He adjusted his sunglasses, smiling a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His gaze flicked upward, toward the sky where the drone had just been. "Mr. Smith," Reed said, his voice smooth, practiced. "Lovely property you have here. Shame about the isolation. Must get lonely. Though I see you find ways to entertain yourself. Was that a drone I saw?" Lucas's mouth went dry. "My daughter. Just a hobby. Taking pictures of the sunset." "Sunset," Reed repeated, glancing at the sun still high in the afternoon sky. "Right." He looked around, sniffing the air. "We've had reports, noise complaints, roaring some say, from this direction." "It's a wildlife reserve, Warden," Lucas said, keeping his face neutral, forcing his heartbeat to slow. "I hear lions every night, usually coming from your side of the fence." Reed chuckled, but his eyes were hard, scanning the property behind Lucas. "True, but the sound carries differently when it's close. And I noticed your meat consumption at the local butcher has gone up significantly. That's a lot of steak for a family of 3. Do you have a lot of barbecues?" Lucas felt the blood drain from his face, but he held his ground. "My wife cooks for the church soup kitchen in town. Is there a crime against charity, Warden?" Reed stared at him for a long moment. The silence stretched, tight as a piano wire. Lucas could hear the blood rushing in his ears. Then, Reed smiled again, showing too many teeth. "No crime," Reed said lightly. "Just checking in. We have to be careful. Poachers are active in the area. We wouldn't want anything illegal happening on private land. It carries a heavy sentence. 10 years, I believe. Plus seizure of assets." Reed tipped his hat, climbed back into the Land Rover, and reversed slowly. Lucas watched him go until the dust settled. He knew, with absolute certainty, that Reed hadn't bought the lie. The comment about the drone confirmed it. Reed suspected they had seen something they shouldn't have. He turned and ran into the house. "Jane! Amy! Pack bags. Now. Amy, start uploading that footage to the cloud. Send it to the federal police, the news, everyone." "I am," Amy said, her fingers flying over her laptop keys. "But the internet is crawling, Dad. It says 4 hours remaining. The file is huge." "Keep it running," Lucas said, grabbing his keys from the bowl. "He's coming back, and he won't be alone next time. We have to move them." Tonight. Dr. Jacob Lane arrived 20 minutes later, his battered Jeep screeching into the back paddock. Lucas had called him the moment Reed left. Jacob was a pariah in the conservation world, a brilliant biologist with wild hair and grease-stained hands who had been fired from the National Parks Service for punching a bureaucrat who refused to fund an anti-poaching unit. He was the only person Lucas trusted. Jacob didn't waste time with pleasantries. He marched into the house, smelling of engine oil, and looked at the drone footage on Amy's laptop. He watched the clip of the pacing lioness 3 times. "That's Mara," Jacob said, his voice rough. "She's a legend. Local genetics. Extremely rare bloodline. She disappeared 3 months ago. Official report said she died of a snakebite." "She's alive," Amy said, pointing at the screen. "And she's furious." "This is a canned hunt," Jacob said, his face darkening with a rage that terrified Lucas. "Reed is breeding her. He sold the mother to a collector, but the collector probably wanted a clean hunt. They keep her in a cage, drug her, and then release her into a fenced area for some rich tourist to shoot. It's a slaughter. It's not hunting, it's execution." "And the cubs?" Jane asked, her hand covering her mouth. "Loose ends," Jacob said grimly. Or inventory. The pet trade pays $50,000 for a cub. If Reed knows you have them, he's not coming to arrest you, he's coming to liquidate the evidence and take the assets. The timeline had collapsed. They didn't have weeks. They had hours. We can't leave them, Amy said, her voice trembling. We can't just run. We aren't running, Lucas said. He looked at his family. He looked at the gentle, fierce determination in his wife's eyes and the terrified bravery of his daughter. He realized that his structure, his organized life, didn't matter anymore. This mattered. We're going to put them back. Back? Jacob looked at him like he was crazy. Lucas, they are 3 months old. Without a pride, the hyenas will kill them in an hour. They don't know how to hunt. We don't put them in the wild, Lucas said. He pointed to the map on the screen, to the red dot where Mara was caged. We take them to her. You want to break into a heavily armed poaching compound, carrying 200 pounds of lions, and facilitate a family reunion? Jacob asked. That's suicide. It's the only chance they have, Jane said, stepping forward. If Mara accepts them, they are a pride. If they are a pride, they have a chance. And if she doesn't? Jacob asked softly. Then we all die, Lucas said. The plan was madness, but desperation made it seem logical. They began the chaotic process of loading the cubs. It was a nightmare. The cubs sensed the tension. Atlas fought the leash, snarling and snapping, his claws raking the floor. It took Lucas and Jacob both to wrestle him into the reinforced horse trailer hitched to Lucas's truck. They secured the cubs behind the sliding partition in the front of the trailer, leaving the main rear bay empty for the mother. Jinx scrambled up the side of the trailer, hissing like a steam engine, before Amy coaxed him in. Jane was bleeding from a long scratch on her forearm, a stark reminder that her babies were predators. I'm fine, she gritted out, wrapping it in duct tape. Keep moving. They had just locked the trailer door when the sound of engines cut through the night air. Lights flooded the driveway. Not one truck, but 3. They're here, Amy screamed from the porch, and the upload is only at 20%. The front gate, a heavy iron structure, rattled as a truck rammed it. Reed wasn't waiting for a warrant. This was a raid. Go, Jacob yelled. I'll buy you time. Take the tablet, keep the upload running on the cellular data. Jacob ran toward the stables where the Smiths' 2 riding horses were kept. He threw open the stall doors and slapped the rumps of the startled animals. Run! Go! The horses bolted, galloping straight toward the driveway, their hooves thundering on the gravel. The sudden stampede of 1,000-pound animals caused the lead truck at the gate to swerve violently, crashing into the ditch. In the confusion, Lucas slammed his truck into gear. Hold on! He didn't take the driveway. He floored the accelerator and drove straight through the backyard fence, the wood splintering like matchsticks. The truck bucked and roared as they tore across the pasture, the horse trailer bouncing dangerously behind them. They hit the service road that ran along the reserve perimeter, mud spraying over the windshield. Behind them, shouts and gunfire erupted. They're shooting! Jane cried, ducking her head. They aren't shooting at us, Lucas said, his knuckles white on the wheel. They're shooting to scare us into stopping. Amy, map! Where is the breach point? 2 miles east! Amy shouted from the back seat, clutching the tablet. The signal is weak out here, Dad! The upload is pausing! Just keep it alive, Lucas shouted. We need those files to reach the authorities, or no one is coming to help us. The chase was on. In the rearview mirror, Lucas saw headlights bouncing in the distance. Reed's men were faster, but Lucas knew this land. He had designed the drainage systems for the properties out here. He knew where the ground was soft. He took a hard left, aiming for what looked like a solid wall of brush. Lucas! Jane screamed. Trust me! He plowed through the brush, the truck shuddering as branches whipped the sides like scourges. The wheels spun in deep mud, whining, then caught traction on the roots below. They were on the old logging track, a tunnel of green darkness. The trailer swayed violently. Inside, the cubs were roaring, a sound of pure terror that vibrated through the chassis of the truck. We're hurting them, Amy sobbed. We're saving them. Lucas said, though he wasn't sure. He felt a sick knot of guilt in his stomach. He was a landscape architect, a suburban dad. He wasn't an action hero. He was just a man who couldn't stand to see something innocent destroyed. They drove for 20 minutes in silence, the only sound the roar of the engine and the snapping of branches. Finally, the GPS on Amy's tablet beeped. "We're here," she whispered. "The camp is over that ridge." Lucas killed the headlights. He let the truck roll to a stop in the shadow of a massive baobab tree. Silence rushed back in, oppressive and suffocating. "Jacob?" Jane asked. "He'll meet us," Lucas said, hoping it was true. Jacob had taken his own jeep on a separate route to draw the main pursuit away. They stepped out of the truck. The air here was thick, with the smell of wood smoke, diesel, and raw sewage. Through the trees, they could see the flicker of campfires and the harsh, white glare of floodlights. "Stay here," Lucas told Jane and Amy. "Keep the trailer locked. Do not open it unless I tell you." "I'm coming," Jane said, her voice steely. "No," Lucas grabbed her shoulders. "I need you to be the vet. If we get Mara out, she needs to be assessed instantly. I'm going in to cut the lock." "I'm going with you, Dad," Amy said. "Absolutely not." Lucas started, but a hand appeared on his shoulder. It was Jacob. He had materialized out of the darkness like a ghost, his face smeared with mud and sweat. "She's right," Jacob whispered. "I need you to help me rig the distraction. Amy knows the layout from the drone. She can guide Lucas to the cage while I hit the generator." Lucas looked at his daughter. She was terrified, trembling like a leaf, but her jaw was set. She looked so much like her mother. "Okay," Lucas breathed. "Okay, let's go get our mother back." The infiltration was a terrifying exercise in stealth. The camp was surrounded by a makeshift electric fence. Jacob shorted it with a pair of jumper cables, sparks showering silently into the wet grass like fireworks. They moved in a crouch, darting from crate to crate. The camp was ugly, a scar on the land. There were skinning racks, piles of rusty snares, and in the center, a large transport truck with a cage mounted on the back. Inside the cage was Mara. Even in the dim light, she was magnificent. She was huge, far larger than Lucas expected, her muscles rippling beneath a coat that was dull with dust and neglect. She was pacing the tight confines of the cage. 3 steps, turn. 3 steps, turn. Her eyes were yellow fire, burning with a hate that felt ancient. "She's awake," Lucas whispered. "That's a problem." "Better than dead," Jacob murmured. He handed Lucas a tranquilizer pistol. "Low dose. We don't want her comatose. Just ataxic. Loose muscles, jelly legs. If she's fully out, she can't run when she wakes up. We need her groggy enough to move, but awake enough to recover fast." Jacob vanished into the shadows. Lucas and Amy crept closer. They were 20 feet from the cage when a guard stepped out of a tent, lighting a cigarette. He was massive, holding an AK-47 lazily by his side. Lucas froze. Amy stopped breathing. The smoke from the cigarette drifted toward them, acrid and pungent. Suddenly, the camp's loudspeakers, used to play calls to lure animals, screeched with static. Then, a roar erupted. It wasn't just a roar. It was the thunderous, earth-shaking territorial call of a massive male lion. Jacob had hooked his phone into their PA system. The effect was instantaneous. The guard dropped his cigarette and spun around, terrified. A male lion roar in the dark meant death. He scrambled for his radio. At the same second, the floodlights died. The camp plunged into absolute blackness. "Now!" Lucas hissed. He sprinted toward the cage, his heart pounding in his throat. Mara, hearing the roar of a rival, threw herself against the bars, snarling. Lucas raised the pistol and fired. The dart thwacked into her flank. She spun, biting at it, but the sedative was fast-acting. She stumbled, her legs going heavy, her movements becoming uncoordinated as the ataxia set in. She slumped against the bars, growling drunkenly. "Amy, the lock!" Amy rushed forward with the bolt cutters. She snapped the massive padlock on the cage door. It fell with a dull thud. "Get the truck!" Lucas yelled into his radio to Jane. "Bring it in! Reverse it right to the cage!" Now. Headlights blinded them. Jane was driving the truck like a battering ram, smashing through the flimsy perimeter fence. She reversed with surgical precision, lining the horse trailer up with the cage door. "Open it!" Lucas screamed. He swung the cage door open. Inside, Mara was sliding down the metal floor, unable to stand. "The tarp!" Jacob shouted, running from the generator shed. He grabbed a heavy canvas sheet from a supply pile. "Roll her onto it! We can't lift her!" Lucas and Jacob rushed into the cage. The smell of the lioness was overpowering, musk and predator. She swiped at them, but her paw moved in slow motion. They shoved the tarp under her massive, dead weight. "Pull!" Lucas grunted. With Amy guiding the trailer ramp, Lucas and Jacob gripped the corners of the canvas. Straining, veins popping in their necks, they dragged the 300-pound animal out of her cage and slid her down the short gap, heaving her up the ramp of the horse trailer into the main bay. The cubs were scrabbling behind the partition wall at the front, smelling their mother. "Close it!" Jane yelled from the driver's seat. They slammed the trailer door shut and locked it. "Go! Go! Go!" But as they ran for the truck cab, a spotlight hit them. Warden Reed stood by the exit, blocking their path with his vehicle. He stepped out, holding a hunting rifle. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked unhinged. "Enough!" Reed shouted, his voice cracking. He aimed the rifle at Jane. "Step away from the truck." The family froze. They were caught. "You really thought you could win?" Reed sneered, walking closer. "You're just a gardener, Smith. And you're a thief. That lion is worth more than your life." He cocked the rifle. "Open the trailer. I want the cubs. I'll let you walk away if you give me the cubs." Lucas looked at Jane. He looked at Amy. He looked at the trailer. Inside that trailer, the ataxia was wearing off. The adrenaline of the rough handling was burning through the light sedative. Lucas could hear a low, rumbling growl building inside the aluminum box. "I can't open it," Lucas said, raising his hands. "It's jammed." "Open it!" Reed stepped closer, lowering the gun slightly to point it at the lock. "Or I shoot your wife." "Okay," Lucas said. "Okay." He walked to the back of the trailer. He looked Reed in the eye. "You really shouldn't have taken her babies, Thomas." Lucas threw the latch and threw himself flat on the mud. The door didn't just open, it exploded outward. Mara launched herself from the darkness of the main bay. She wasn't groggy anymore. She was an avalanche of golden fury. She didn't look at Lucas. She didn't look at Jane. She saw only one thing, the man standing with a weapon. Reed screamed. It was a high, thin sound. He dropped the rifle and scrambled backward, falling over his own feet. Mara didn't kill him. She didn't need to. She landed on the hood of his truck, crushing the metal, and let out a roar that vibrated the fillings in Lucas's teeth. It was a sound of absolute dominance, a sound that said, "This is mine." Reed scrambled into the dirt, weeping, curling into a ball. He was broken. The predator in him had met a true apex, and he had crumbled. But then, Mara turned. Her chest heaving, her eyes wild, she scanned the clearing. She saw Lucas. She saw Jane. She saw Amy. Her tail lashed. She crouched, muscles bunching. She was still terrified, still fighting for her life. The sedative was gone. She was pure instinct now. "Don't move," Jacob whispered from the ground. "Do not move a muscle." Mara took a step toward Amy. She hissed, baring teeth the size of daggers. She didn't know who they were. To her, they were just more humans. Amy didn't run. She stood slowly. "It's okay," Amy whispered, her voice trembling but clear. "Mama, it's okay." Mara growled, low and threatening. Then, from the trailer behind her, a sound drifted out. The sliding partition had been unlatched during the chaos of the loading. A small head poked around the metal divider. "Mew!" It was a tiny, pathetic, high-pitched squeak. Mara froze. Her ears swiveled back. Rue, the runt, wobbled down the ramp. He blinked into the floodlights. He saw the massive lioness. He didn't know her face, but he knew her scent. It was the scent of safety. "Mew!" Atlas appeared behind him. Then Freya. Then Jinx. They squeezed past the divider and tumbled down the ramp. Mara's posture collapsed. The rage drained out of her, replaced by a desperate, frantic confusion. She lowered her head, sniffing the air. She made a soft, chuffing sound. Hum hum. The cubs ran to her. The reunion was chaotic. Mara knocked them over, sniffing them aggressively, licking their faces with a tongue rough enough to strip paint. She checked them for injuries, purring so loudly it sounded like a diesel engine idling. Atlas jumped on her head. Jinx bit her tail. Rue buried himself in the fur of her belly. Lucas watched, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the rain and the mud. He reached out and took Jane's hand. She was sobbing silently, clutching his arm. "Dad," Amy said softly, looking at her tablet. "The upload. It just finished." In the distance, sirens began to wail. Not the local rangers, but the heavy, distinct tone of military police transport vehicles. They had driven 200 miles from the capital, responding to the horrific footage of the canned hunting camp that had just hit every federal server in the country. Mara looked up from her cubs. She looked at Lucas. Her eyes were no longer burning with hate. They were calm. She blinked once, a slow, deliberate acknowledgement, and then turned, nudging her family toward the safety of the deep bush. 1 year later, the sun was setting over the Nila River Valley, casting long, golden shadows across the grasslands. The air was cool and smelled of blooming acacia and dry earth. Lucas stood on the deck holding 2 mugs of tea. The farmhouse looked different now. The fence was gone, replaced by a designated sanctuary boundary that encompassed not just their land, but the 5,000 acres surrounding it. The sign at the gate read, "The Mara Sanctuary, Protected Habitat." The court case had been the biggest story in the country. Warden Reed was serving 20 years. The poaching ring had been dismantled, and the Smith family, well, they were no longer isolated. Donations from around the world had poured in after the video of the rescue, titled, "A Family Found 4 Orphaned Cubs in Their Backyard." What they did next changed everything, went viral. They had used the money to hire rangers, buy the land, and turn their home into a research station. "Here," Lucas said, handing the tea to Jane. She smiled, taking the mug. She looked younger, lighter. The lines of stress that had defined her face for so long were gone, replaced by laughter lines. "Is she there?" "Look," Amy said. She was sitting at the telescope, now 17, and studying for her exams to enter the veterinary college. Lucas leaned in to look through the eyepiece. A mile away, on a rocky outcrop known as Pride Rock, lay Mara. She was sleek, healthy, and regal. Sprawled around her were 4 subadult lions. Atlas was growing a mane, a scruffy mohawk of dark hair. Freya was asleep on her back, paws in the air. Jinx was chewing on a stick. And Rue was sitting right next to Mara, looking out over the valley. As if sensing the eyes on him, the young male lion turned his head toward the farmhouse. He didn't roar, he just watched. A silent sentinel guarding the people who had guarded him. Lucas pulled back from the telescope and looked at his wife and daughter. He realized that the mortgage, the fear, the isolation, it had all been the price of admission for this. They hadn't just saved 4 lions. They had found their own purpose. They had learned that sometimes, to find your place in the world, you have to fight for those who have lost theirs. "They're home," Lucas said softly. "Yeah." Jane squeezed his hand, resting her head on his shoulder. "So are we." If this powerful story moved you, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another epic tale of courage, adventure, and the extraordinary world of lions. Share this video with a friend who would love this story.